Manhwa title in the right corner of the screen. Enjoy watching.
Lady Relicia Roward, she is the princess's servant. And here was the Duke's eldest son, Lockhart Kaidal, and approaching her, he offered to dance. He had an excellent reputation and good looks, so the other ladies did not understand why he approached a servant from the Roward family. But even despite this difference in status, Relicia immediately refused him and asked him to leave. But he didn't leave, but apologized if she was uncomfortable. But he wanted to exclude any misunderstandings and talk in private. But how can they talk if he has hearing problems? She asked him to leave, but he just ignored it. Lockhart looked so desperate and begged for just one chance. Relicia covered her face with her fan and finally said that she knew all his hidden motives and that he was a demon. She wasn't stupid. Lockhart, of course, understood that they served different patrons, but there was no reason why they couldn't be friends. He was even ready to kneel before her to make her treat him warmer. Relicia knew he was saying all this on purpose. Besides, when everyone was looking at them, she just wanted to get rid of him and this attention. Lockhart said he would only leave her alone if they went to dinner together in Chapter 2 at a restaurant full of nobles. Relicia refused. She didn't want people to think she had fallen in love with him and betrayed the princess. And then he said that if she refused, he would reveal all her deception. This was already a direct threat to make her agree. Lockhart made her say his name loudly for all the people to hear. It would have been nice if she had shouted it at him. He liked her hysterical voice too. Relicia was at a disadvantage, but what was worse was that Lockhart never left her. She called him a pervert and he just laughed and kissed her hand. He didn't just bear the name of the lion cub Tager. He was going to destroy Relicia no matter what. But she was not afraid of these words, but only became interested. I would like to see how he will try to do it. When Relicia was little, she lived with her mother in a house on Mount Tunbar. Her mother would go on forays to collect herbs, and Relicia would take them to the apothecary for money. But the walk back through the village was far from a walk in the park. The local children hated Relicia and would attack her, beat her with sticks or throw stones at her, calling her crazy. She was a weirdo without a father, and the word father always came up at the worst moments. Because of this, Relicia didn't even want to know who her father was or where he was. Mom was the only joy in her life. When they threw stones at Relicia, she came home, gathered up I can't. Mom consoled her all night until the rain stopped. But a little later, Relicia noticed her mother quietly crying in the living room. It's because the other kids didn't like Relicia, or because they called her names because she had no father, or maybe there are other reasons. But the reason didn't matter. What mattered was that Mom cried because of Relicia. She was the closest person to her, and when her daughter made her cry, she couldn't sleep that night from guilt and shock. When Mom left early in the morning to collect herbs again, Relicia ran up to her. She was very worried, but her mother said that she would be back soon, considering the mountain paths. It would take several days. Relicia saw her mother's calm smile, and at that moment, she decided that she would never hurt her again or make her cry again. Several days had passed, and when Relicia came to the village again, she deliberately walked along the crowded streets to be less noticeable. But this still did not save her from the attention of the village boys. As soon as they saw that the ugly woman had returned from the mountain, they immediately took out their sticks and began to approach her. They insulted her again and told her to go back to the mountains. But Relicia remembered how her mother had cried all night because of what had happened recently. So she couldn't let it happen this time. Relicia is about safety. Today she brought a stick to protect herself. And she looked so serious, her frightening appearance was more than ever, which is why the boys did not expect this and were scared. Relicia was able to scare them so much with just words that they ran away from her. She was so surprised, but also happy. She didn't think she would ever be able to defeat such a crowd, and so easily. Relicia happily returned home and really wanted to tell her mother when she returned, so that she would not cry anymore. 3 days had passed, but Mom had not returned, although she had never been so late, and the weather was bad. Relicia began to worry, but she was sure that her mother would return, because she had promised, and she never broke her promises. The girl heard the doors to the house open and was already happy. Mom had finally arrived. But it turned out that it was not the mother, but the elder of the village. He came in such bad weather for a reason, and asked the girl to go with him to the village. Relicia didn't understand why. Besides, her mother hadn't returned yet, she couldn't leave the house. But the elder didn't come here for no reason. He said with regret that Mom would never come home again. Relicia was shocked. She went with the elder to the village to find out what was wrong, and then it turned out that her mother had apparently slipped and fallen. Hunters found her in the valley and brought her to the village. The only thing left of her mother was a large pot, and everyone was very sympathetic to the girl. The elder asked where she would go now and what she would do. He was ready to offer help to a child without parents. But Relisha, angry, simply ran home. She had nowhere else to go. Relisha ran and became more and more aware of what had happened. Then she began to cry. Mom said she would come home and return no matter what. She promised, but in the end she didn't come. Relisha trusted her, but it turns out she lied, and then the girl decided that she would never trust anyone again. She was only 10 years old then, and there was no one except her mother who could take care of her. She fell asleep on the cold floor, but when she woke up, for some reason she was lying in her bed. When she got up, she saw a stranger in the house and was very scared. He was sitting right in front of her. His face was full of regret, and he said the name Relisha Roward. The girl said he was mistaken. Her last name was Roba. Yes, the man claimed the opposite. His name is Count Helidin Roward, and he is her father. Relisha immediately said that this was not true. She did not have a father. Then the Count thought that perhaps her mother had found herself a husband, and that was why the girl had a father. But Relisha said that she doesn't have a dad, and her mom never had a husband. Because if she had been married, she would never have lived like this. The Count wanted to say a lot, but she didn't know how to talk to a traumatized child. From now on, he would take care of her. Relisha was very angry. Her father had been missing somewhere all her life, and now he had suddenly appeared to take custody of her. But her mother can't be brought back. Anger changed to sadness, and when the girl cried, the Count was always there and hugged her until she calmed down. Then she sat with a swollen and red face and listened to what he was telling her. The Count said that Mom named her after his favorite flowers. This was not the most pleasant information because the Count abandoned Mom. He showed Relisha a ribbon that belonged to her mother, and she loved it very much. Then the Count said that he had never rejected Melia. One day, she secretly left him, and despite the fact that he sent people to search for her, he could not find her for 10 years. And all this time, he did not even know that she was pregnant and gave birth to a child. But a couple of days ago, Relisha's bouquet in a silk band was delivered home to the county, and then he used it to find his beloved, but found a child. This armband was a gift from him to Melia, but when she sent it to his home, the Count found the house and now realized that Melia wanted him to take their daughter. The next day, Relisha and he arrived at the villa. It was a wonderful place to live. Relisha was given a huge, luxurious room. The Count said that all this now belonged to her, and a tutor would arrive tomorrow to begin her studies. Relisha was little and didn't even know such words. She didn't understand what she was doing here. And the next day, tutor Julia came, but the girl still didn't know what that word was. Julia was glad that the girl was interested in words and began asking her many questions without answering the first one herself. Relisha got angry because she asked first and Julia interrupted her, so the girl called her a blockhead. The tutor was surprised and didn't know what the word was, and Relisha didn't even know how to explain it, so Julia left abruptly. Relisha was even happy thinking she had won. This word was hardly a curse, but she was still scared. However, it was not to be, and very soon the tutor returned and brought several imperial dictionaries published by the Tager family. She was going to look for that word in those words to see what it meant. Relisha was shocked. Then the tutor found the meaning of this word. It is a mildly derogatory term for a person who has wished bad things, for example, to go to prison or to the top attempt. Relisha didn't mean anything like that at all. She didn't agree with the dictionary meaning. I said that actually the word doesn't have that meaning, but the tutor said that these people couldn't be mistaken. They were quite serious about their work. At the very top is Emperor Tagarn. Right below him is the Empress's palace, and below them are the palaces of the princesses and princes, and the Imperial Academy is under the direct control of the Administrative Bureau. For general development, the lion crest is the symbol of the Imperial Tagar family, and Count Roward is called the third lion in the Empire. This means that the Emperor has high hopes for him. The first Leo is the Duke who commands the knights, and the second Leo has been with her for a very long time, and the Emperor left the post empty in his honor. Relisha was 10 years old and so naive. She learned everything that Julia taught her, not knowing that it was her program, and those few months that she spent in the villa were the most peaceful in her life. Suddenly a carriage arrived and a woman came out. When Julia saw her, she was very scared because it was Countess Roward. This woman looked at the flower, and from that moment on, one could say that Relisha's happiness was over because she was an illegitimate child. 7 years passed, and Relisha was already living in the Roward estate with her family. A lot had happened since the Countess had brought her here. When the Count learned that Relisha would now live here, he was immediately delighted and gave her a tour of all the estates. People quickly recognized Relisha as the Count's daughter due to her physical resemblance to him, and news that he had brought an illegitimate daughter into his home quickly spread. Thanks to this, the Countess was unable to neglect or drive out Relisha, and later she introduced her to a new personal teacher and said that it was for her own good. It didn't take long for Relisha to realize that this was just to make life difficult, because while she was studying with this teacher, he was constantly humiliating and insulting her, while affecting her parents as well. And he also constantly compared it to the noble media that send this material to 8-year-olds. And Relisha didn't know anything at 10. What had she and her mother been doing all this time? Relisha had tolerated the insults at first, but when it crossed the line, she said that she was usually a very bright student when she studied with Yulia. And if now he doesn't understand his lessons, then it's probably the teachers, and it's he who is the disappointment for the Count. The teacher then turned red with rage and ran out of the room, but in the next lesson he began to use physical violence as punishment. He deliberately left impossible tasks for Relisha, and every wrong answer killed the lessons with a stick. And very soon the girl realized that opposing him would not lead to anything good. But he didn't realize that he was actually teaching her how to torture people in a frightening way. Due to such terrible conditions, Relisha began to look for ways to get rid of this teacher, and after the next lesson she asked the Count to go for a walk with her, and then he saw the teacher having an affair with the maid, and children were not allowed to see such things, and this was the last time Relisha saw this teacher. But still, freedom and joy did not last long. Although she got rid of that bad teacher, she could not get rid of the bad family. Here, for example, is her sister, Misa's legitimate daughter. They are about the same age. Misa could just burst into the room and accuse Relisha of taking her book, although this book does not belong to anyone, and whoever takes it first gets to read it. Misa was very angry, although she herself never reads. She just did not want Relisha to take this book, so she behaved rudely. The Countess and her daughter Misa really couldn't accept the fact of living in Relisha's estate, and they constantly humiliated and bullied her. But Relisha found a way out. She was planning to enroll in the Imperial Academy, which is also a boarding school, to get out of this estate. After graduating from the academy, she could build a successful career as a teacher for some noble family, so she could protect the Count's reputation and save herself at the same time. It was the perfect plan that Relisha had been thinking about for years, and she was absolutely ready for the exam. If you think about it, the girl who used to collect and sell herbs to survive is now preparing for the exam at the academy. It's literally a miracle. She even had one maid, Teria, who noticed that Lady Misa was leaving with a book in her hand, so Relisha asked for the book to be returned in a couple of hours when Misa left. In fact, she is so stupid that she won't even remember taking the book after a few hours. Relisha took such antics calmly. She didn't want to waste time hating anyone and was simply focused on her studies. The entrance exams are in a week, and Relisha has good results in history and math. The only thing she is really bad at is music, and it is unlikely that she will pass because of this. Julia was also a tutor and taught Relisha everything, so the Count decided to reward her for her hard work after all the exams were over. Relisha still called her father Count. She hadn't thought about calling him anything else, but after Julia reminded her of this, she thought about it. Remembering her childhood, Relisha understood that she couldn't be distracted by something like that right now, and it would be better to deal with it after the exams. When she returned to her room, she couldn't find her notebook with important notes anywhere, and then she found Misa's hair in the room and realized that she was the one who stole the notebook. It was annoying, more than just a book, because this notebook contained all the important notes for preparing for the exam. And when evening came, the Countess for some reason called Relisha to her. The girl thought that she would be scolded for something again. The Countess said that Misa had cried for hours today after she stole Relisha's notebook. It was no secret, they had spoken honestly among themselves. Misa cried and decided that she would use this notebook to cheat on tests. Relisha was not against borrowing the notebook if it would help, because she had all the knowledge in her head. The Countess said that all the teachers were impressed by these notes in the notebook. They thought that the Countess had hired more teachers, and no one would believe that Relisha had written it herself. Thanks to this, the Countess understood her level of knowledge, and therefore told her not to take part in the entrance exam to the academy. She made him tell the Count that she had simply changed her mind. The Countess explained that if an illegitimate child were to score the highest marks on the entrance exams, It would greatly offend the honor of children from honorable noble families, and everyone would blame the Roward family for it. Relisha didn't want to cause trouble. She said she would discuss it with the Count and make a decision, but the Countess said not to do it because she wanted to do it as quietly as possible. She didn't try to force Relisha, but even if she passed the exam, she still wouldn't last long at the academy, because no one wants to study with the daughter of a prostitute, so she will quickly be expelled for some reason. Relisha was angry because her mother had never done anything like that, and the Countess knew about it. But the important thing is that gossip is told by others, and this cannot be changed in any way. Relisha asked the Countess what about the reputation of her house and her husband, because he is a decent man. How can you lie so much? But the Countess can lie just to protect her daughter from trouble. She is ready to sacrifice her husband's reputation, and Relisha will be branded the daughter of a prostitute for the rest of her life, and then no noble family will hire her as a teacher. And if this does happen, the Countess will do everything she can to prevent it, because she cannot receive her husband's love, so she wants to get at least some joy in life. After this conversation, Relisha decided to leave the house. She walked into Tolman's pharmacy, and the owner was immediately pleased to see her. She told him that she wouldn't be showing up anytime soon, but then she came again, and he again offered her to work here. But Relisha, upset, just decided to drop in here today and was already leaving. Tolman kept asking her to work for him because he was willing to pay her handsomely for it. And anyway, he really is a good man, but Relisha refused. She is so confused now that even the smell of her favorite herbs does not improve her mood. She worked so hard to get into the academy, but now it turns out that it was all in vain. In the end, even that doesn't matter. Apparently, the Countess had been planning this for a long time and watched Relisha study day and night, waiting for the last moment to break her completely. Relisha was so irritated that she just walked down that dark alley and said every bad word she knew. Only suddenly someone heard it and paid attention to her. It was a guy who was holding the girl's hand and looking at Relisha. The girl he was holding was crying and begging for help. Relisha was sure that this was a nobleman who helped girls, and of course she was going to help this girl. This guy wasn't interested in Relisha at all. He didn't just chase her away, pretending not to hear these rude remarks. But she couldn't leave things as they were. She went up to him and said that she would break his wrist and tell his parents that he was terrorizing a woman on the street. At that moment, the girl happily ran away, finally free. This guy ran after her, but Relisha stopped him and held him back so that this girl would run away. And now she was turning the corner with the hope of finally escaping. But then another man blocked her path. He had already grabbed her hands and quickly pulled out what she was hiding from her clothes, and then dragged it to Relisha and that guy. Relisha saw the obvious way, a purse with a bunch of gold coins, and then realized that it was the thief who stole the purse from the nobleman. That's why he was holding her. And then that girl used sympathy to escape. Relisha accidentally mistook the victim for a pervert and everything turned out this way, so she felt guilty and will never forget this shame. She decided to make sure once again that these guys weren't robbing her. It was clear from her face that she was definitely a thief, because she was disappointed that she was caught. The guy then turned to Relisha to make her admit her mistake, but she suddenly just started running away. Suddenly another man appeared, because of whom this knight immediately let the thief go. You could say she was just lucky. Actually, this guy who came in second was Prince Grayan Tager, and he was just enjoying his time out. And his assistant Kaidel got into such a situation and looked for a long time after the girl who ran away, but he did not pay attention to it. Relisha came home and couldn't stop laughing. But it was a nervous laugh. She hoped that the guy hadn't seen her whole face because she had a hood up. She hoped that she would never see the guy again. This anxiety changed to another. She did not know what to do or what to say to the Count. And then suddenly, in the evening, he came to her. He noticed that she hadn't looked so good lately. He was worried that she might be sick. She said that everything was fine and that there would be an exam tomorrow. Father was confident in her and told her to do everything as usual and not to worry about the results. She will be coming of age soon, so before entering the academy, she must attend the ball as a debut, and better late than never. Entering the academy is a great social ladder. Relisha sadly realized that she would not be accepted to the academy and did not tell her father about it. She thought that she was not confident in her abilities. She would not be able to pass the exam to study at the best academy of the empire. But even so, the Count supported her and said that he would take her to the exam the next morning. Relisha was just going to hand in a blank form and tell everyone she passed, and later say she was too tired to take the exams next year. Relisha was still young, and it was hard for her to deal with all the problems on her own. The next day, the whole family came to take the exam. Relisha looked tired because she hadn't slept all night and had been disappointed all week, but she didn't need the energy to think about today. Relisha noticed the Kaidal family flag nearby, so someone from their house was taking the exam today. There was a duke there, the first lion of the empire, and next to him, it seemed, was his son. But Relisha wasn't very interested at that moment. Misa was happy because they both went to take exams. From her carefree face, Relisha immediately realized that Misa didn't know anything about what her mother had done. It was so natural for a countess to protect her daughter, and Relisha understood because her mother also did everything to make her happy. Relisha went to the exam, actually intending to leave later, while the count was not looking. Then everything would be in its place: the countess's reputation, the count's reputation, and her mother's reputation. Everything would be as it should be. At the time of the exam, Relisha went to the pharmacy. Today she decided to try herself as a consultant. She was well-versed in herbs and could also sell any remedy. Tolman couldn't stop admiring this beautiful work. Relisha was simply born to be a herbalist because she explained all the effects and remedies so skillfully. Relisha had dreamed of becoming a teacher for so long, but now the idea of working here and opening her own store one day seemed good to her. Relisha still wasn't sure she would work, but she decided to come here sometimes to help. Tolman was very happy about this, because sooner or later she would want to become a worker. They noticed that a lot of carriages were starting to arrive, and then Relisha realized that the exam was over, and it was time for her to go too. A week later, the results came in, and Misa was incredibly happy. She passed, everyone congratulated her. Relisha had never seen the Countess so happy before, and didn't even know she was capable of such feelings. But apparently she really loves her daughter. Relisha decided to just quietly leave at that moment, because she already knew what was in the envelope, and she no longer wanted to be part of the happy family moments. She just sat in her room and was terribly sad. Very soon the Count came for her. He immediately realized that she had failed the exam and said that now the house would be very quiet, and next year she would be able to concentrate better on her studies to enter the academy. He realized that he had to give Relisha the teachers who taught her sister so that she too could pass the exams. But Relisha refused. She said that no one was to blame for anything. The Count said that everything in this life happens at the right moment. Just because Relisha couldn't pass the exam today doesn't mean she failed in this life. She still has many opportunities and chances. Relisha at this point only asked, "Is she still the Count's heir?" She wanted to save money to start her own business. But when she said this, the Count somehow remained silent. So she apologized, and they pretended that this conversation had never happened. And as soon as she had time to exhale after the Count left, Misa came into her room. Relisha congratulated her on passing the exam, and Misa proudly said that it was obvious, because the Roward family was an intellectual family. It was Dad's intelligence that brought the family out of the crisis. Relisha didn't really want to talk to Misa right now, and although it wasn't a very likely case, she had heard this story once too. There was a time when the previous Earl Roward was living in exile for insulting the Emperor, and apparently that was the time he met her mother. He then began a relationship with her, but in order to avoid political isolation, he had to marry an incredibly wealthy noblewoman who favored the Emperor. Misa secretly looked at Relisha's results and saw that it said 0. Misa had no doubt at first that Relisha would have passed the exam without any problems, with the highest score. But after she saw her notebook, she realized that if the result said 0, it could only mean one thing. She passed the exam with nothing. Relisha asked Misa not to tell anyone about it, but her sister guessed that it was because of her mother. She knew from the beginning that her mother would not leave Relisha alone, and knew how much she wanted to go there so she could leave here and live in the dorms. Relisha was disappointed. Why, if Misa knew everything so well, didn't she help or do anything? Misa hadn't asked her mother to do this, and had no idea that it would happen this way. But now she felt guilty. So, as an apology, she decided to tell a little secret. It's because before Relisha came here, 7 years ago, her mother started sending letters here, but the Countess burned them behind her father's back and used her connections to manipulate the men the Count sent to find the woman into lying about finding her. It was indeed a mystery how Relisha had been tracked down under such circumstances. But in any case, Misa had said so that her sister would understand that her father really wanted to find her, and he would definitely be upset by her detachment. Misa asked to leave it between them and told all this only in honor of the end of their confrontation, because as soon as she crossed the threshold of the academy, she was sure that she would never see Relisha again. And in fact, she was very sorry. Relisha was left alone in her room, and she was truly in shock. Mom started sending letters to the Count as soon as Relisha returned from the village injured. Mom cried that night and probably decided that she couldn't continue raising her daughter in such an environment and was probably afraid that if she died, no one would be able to look after her daughter. She contacted the Count, despite the risk, but received no response. However, she held out for a few more years before giving in. She wrote letters, and then, as a sign that they would never see each other again, she sent him a bouquet of Relicia flowers tied with a ribbon, the only gift he had ever given her. Since the bouquet had no sender, it reached the Count safely, and he immediately understood everything thanks to the ribbon. But by that time, it was too late. Relisha can't imagine how broken her mother must have felt, thinking that she had truly been abandoned. If the Count had received even one of those letters, she might be alive today. For the first time in 7 years, Relisha cried out loud, and she wasn't afraid that someone would hear her. After all, they would think that she was crying for the failed exam. At the Kadylov estate, there was also a guy who was taking the exam. Lockhart looked at the forest. He obviously passed, but wanted to get the highest score. However, it turned out that the highest score was left to someone else, even though they did not take music. This student is named Rabori Siha. This name was very strange, and there is no noble family with the surname Siha, and no information could be found out. This name wasn't even on the list of applicants to the academy, so they decided not to take his scores into account. Even if he showed up in person, that meant Lockhart would still be announced as the best. But he was still disappointed because he was sure that he would get the highest score, because the exam was quite easy. But someone overtook him without even passing the exam completely. Lockhart also failed his music exam because the strings snapped while he was playing, because he had been practicing with the sword for so long that he misjudged the strength. Lockhart didn't even know if he really needed to attend this academy. It was just a place for a nobleman to find his place in life. And he had already found his place and even earned the nickname Lion of Tagar for saving the prince in the war. But the academy demands his admission. After all, they would be honored to have heroes like Lockhart among their students, and there are things he can only achieve at the academy. So he can just use it as an advantage and enjoy the privileges. He should be the successor as the first Lion of Tagar. But the thing is, Lockhart has long since become the successor. The heir to the family must be chosen by the emperor personally. He is responsible for the safety of the entire family. And if he can personally create an emperor on whom the family can rely, then even better. If Lockhart can one day place a second prince on the throne, he will become the undisputed first Lion of Tagar. At the Roward estate, Misa and her mother chose many different outfits, although she already had many dresses that she never wore. Misa still bought a lot of them because everyone else bought new things. And Relisha didn't do anything like that. She just lay on the bed and did nothing. She only eats and sleeps. Life has become very easy, but part of her still feels uncomfortable. One day the Count came to her room and said that they were going on a trip together. Relisha had nothing to do now, so she agreed and was soon riding with him in a carriage. They were silent for a long time. Relisha looked out the window and the Count looked at her. He did not understand why she did not even ask where they were going. That's why he himself said that they were going to a beautiful beach near the border of the southern region. Everyone immediately falls in love with Gibran Beach. The ocean is incredibly clean. There is even a big hotel there, and it is a very quiet and beautiful place. Relisha couldn't believe that this place was quiet, because it was the time of year when other nobles went on vacation, and there might not even be any vacancies in the hotel. But the Count said not to worry, because there would always be a place for them. Relisha remembered Misa's words about her mother writing letters to the Count, and Relisha couldn't stop thinking about it. Her head was going to explode. So to not keep it to herself, she told the Count that apparently her mother really wanted to return to him. He was shocked and didn't understand what she was talking about. Relisha simply asked him to believe it. She didn't have the courage to tell him that the Countess had gotten rid of her mother's letters behind his back. It would only make things worse for both of them. Now that she thought about it, the Count must have been hurt by his mother too, because he loved her. But she disappeared without saying a word and hid the child's existence. Relisha wondered if the Count was disappointed that she didn't call him father. She asked about it. In fact, he would be very happy if she called him daddy at least once or twice a year. Relisha decided to make it a gift for him for his last birthday. She called him daddy because his birthday had already passed. The Count had been waiting for these words for a long time, so he couldn't even hold back his tears and simply turned away. Relisha didn't try to calm him down or embarrass him. In fact, it was kind of funny. The rest of the way they rode simply holding hands. And so when they arrived, it turned out that this place was really very beautiful. And looking at the ocean, Relisha remembered that her life was not over. If she did not get into the academy, it was stupid to worry about it now. She decided to just enjoy the moment. As sunset approached, Relisha came to the mountain to watch. But it turned out that someone had arrived here before her and was already sitting at the cliff. Relisha noticed him trying to grab the sword out of habit. Apparently, this is the knight who returned from the war, Amada. Suddenly he heard sounds, and of course he went to see who had come. The guy was clearly unhappy with the company, so the group asked her what she wanted. Relisha did not lose her head, and having answered, asked him, "What does he want?" As he is to her, so she is to him. Relisha is dressed like the Count's daughter, but he doesn't care about manners. He looks like a commoner. She didn't want to be there anymore and decided, "I'll just leave so as not to bother anyone." But the guy stopped her, and he asked, "Is she staying at the hotel too?" It was kind of a suspicious question, so "Who is she?" It was very impolite to ask such a difficult question to a complete stranger, and Relisha, of course, did not answer him. Besides, it was clear from his appearance that he had just returned from Tunbar. The guy, hearing this, was very surprised. Relisha just saw him checking on the spot, or less. So he is a knight, and apparently received a good salary for participating in the war, was able to come to this expensive hotel. They both wanted answers to their questions, but both decided to keep it a secret. Relisha, as she left, told him, "Enjoy this place while you can." He was a little offended by this phrase, as if it implied that he was poor, but she just didn't know how long the place would be a resort, so she decided to wish them a good time. And he latched on and started asking why she was even thinking about it. Relisha started because the kingdom of Egghide was trying to take all the iron ore for themselves by luring the Amada people to the empire. The empire had conquered them in a war, but Relisha would not believe that the Amada people would sell the ore to the empire's enemies, so the kingdom would have to find a new supplier. Smilan seems like a good candidate because it's on the neighboring coast and has good diplomatic relations with Igal, but what does that have to do with the beach? That's because the resort is part of the empire and is very close to Smilan's trade routes. Based on the recent war and the pirates that are training for robbery in this water area, it is likely that Igal will send warships along these dangerous routes. Then the empire will have to launch its own fleet, and this is the most ideal place to do it. In this case, it serves as a burden on the hotel's operations, and no one wants to see warships and soldiers in the window during their vacation. Relisha said this and saw that the guy's face looked disappointed, as if it would be better if he didn't hear it. Relisha suggested that they just forget about this conversation because she didn't want to imprint this place in her memory. When she saw some nobleman walking in the distance, and I was sure that it was that guy's master, so I decided to leave quickly. This guy is actually Lockhart. He came to the prince to take him back to the hotel and rest so that the stitches wouldn't come apart. I immediately asked him who else was staying at this hotel, since this place belongs to the imperial palace. There is no one here to be afraid of. But today the Duke, Lockhart's father, and the Earl arrived here. A little earlier, he arrived with his daughter. The prince thought that this was the same daughter who had recently been admitted to the academy, but in any case, she was too young for him. The prince wanted to make an announcement about the rewards for the war veterans next week, but the empress is not very happy about that, or about the fact that the prince has decided to recover here. She claims that since the army fighting in Amada was disbanded, the prince cannot interfere in the post-war negotiations, which means even more work. She naturally wants Prince Oral to be the one distributing the food and to take credit for the second prince's accomplishments once the war is over. Grayan, who took over from his ailing older brother Oral and led the empire to victory, his friendship with Lockhart, who fought at his side from Bashkiria, is his life. Only the bards would be interested in such a story. Grayan almost died from wounds on the battlefield when Prince Oral tried to take all his achievements for himself. It's too early to drag on with time as the war is over, but how he behaves now will determine his future. He will either become a war hero or be deprived of what he deserves. Relisha returned to the hotel calmly after this walk, although the meeting was rather strange. When she came to her father, he told her to greet Duke Cadel. It was the first time they met, and the Duke was sure that Relisha had recently enrolled in the academy. But the Count said that this was the second daughter, And it's funny that everyone acts as if they don't know about the second illegitimate child of their political rival. Soon another aristocrat came up. He greeted the Count. They were already acquainted. The Count was very glad to see Lockhart, who was simply a wonderful man and led the empire to victory. While they were discussing something, Relisha went into a stupor because she recognized that face. It was the guy with the thief in the alley. Relisha felt like she was going crazy remembering this, so she wanted to leave as quickly as possible. But she didn't get to go because they all ended up going together. This guy was asking her about all sorts of things. Does she like walking? Relisha said that she was afraid to leave the house, so she didn't like to go for walks. In fact, this is true now, because she will never leave the house from the table again. And Lockhart remembered her very well, and said that she seemed to be very comfortable walking at night, and also interfering in the affairs of strangers. He could have continued to laugh at her, but suddenly he was called away on important business, and Relisha breathed a sigh of relief. It was uncomfortable to be in his company, but now she's stuck between two lions, and it seems to be even worse. They didn't notice that she doesn't look so good, so they suggested that she go and rest in her room, and it was literally a salvation. She politely thanked them and left. As soon as she left the restaurant, just exhaled with relief, she became scared because Lockhart was standing next to her and waiting for her. He gestured for her to follow him, and Relisha, although she didn't want to, felt that she had to do it. They came to a room. Lockhart knocked and said his name, asking if he could enter. And when permission was granted, he opened the door and made way for Relisha. She heard a familiar voice and looked inside because it was interesting. And then she suddenly saw that man. She was sure that he was a knight, a commoner, but now he looked like a grandfather, just like that, just like a prince. Lockhart said it was the second prince of Grayan and the lesser son of Tagar. Relisha immediately bowed and said a greeting. She apologized for not recognizing him earlier. Her life is on the line now, and Lockhart was joking. She really does have a habit of not recognizing people. Relisha quickly got out of the situation, saying that she could not recognize him in his regular clothes. But if she had recognized him, despite his attempt at disguise, it would have been even more disrespectful. It turned out that the prince had orchestrated the whole situation. He had learned that Count Roward valued and respected propriety, and realized that if Lockhart left during the meal, the Count would also ask Relisha to leave. It turns out that the prince recently relayed all of Relisha's words to Lockhart because he was surprised that there was someone who spoke exactly like him. Lockhart is indeed incredibly similar to Relisha in this regard. There seemed to be a calm atmosphere between them already, and the prince even laughed, but then, coming closer, he suddenly asked why Relisha was not frightened by the second prince, not frightening enough for her. Relisha said that she just can't believe what's happening and it's like a dream. She always imagined that the imperial family is different from ordinary people, so now she's so nervous that she can't explain anything. The prince laughed at the fact that it never even occurred to her that a prince could wear ordinary clothes. And Lockhart boasted that Lady Relisha had enough character to stand up to a pervert in the middle of the night streets. So the prince came up with another question. How to shut a person up quickly? Is Relisha beautiful for a while or forever? The prince said, forever. Relisha was afraid to answer this question. What if the answer was wrong? It would cause problems for the count. But the prince said that everything was fine. Relisha thought, if princes have the power to get everything they want, then there is someone he can't shut up easily. So she suggested that the prince invite this person to come to the beach, a wonderful place. The road will take time, and anyone who sees this key will not want to leave. Don't check, enough time. They had some strange reaction, and Relisha didn't understand what was going on at all. If they were asking questions, they could at least clarify the context. The prince simply thanked her for the answer and said that they had something in common. The prince told the lady to try to impress Lockhart, since they were both new to the academy and he had received the highest score on the entrance exam. Relisha didn't want to hear anything more about this academy and said that they had confused her with Misa, the official daughter of the count, and admitted that she was actually an illegitimate child. After that, Relisha finally got the time off to leave, and Lockhart actually laughed. He thought the girl was hilarious, but the prince did not look so cheerful. He thought a lot about her words and what she said. Maybe it would be worth calling Prince Aurelius here, so that he could not make this announcement himself. But Lockhart had already thought out a detailed plan, which was why the devil. He said that despite the second prince fighting bravely in the war, and even being maimed, Prince Aurel had never publicly expressed gratitude or respect to him. This was a clear sign of conflict within the imperial family and would make a good comment in the Daily Targan. It was all thanks to this lady who came up with the idea. Lockhart even considered convincing her to wait until next year for the exam, or bring her straight to the imperial palace. The prince really needed someone to watch his back, but not someone who would be killed first. And while he understood Rolicius's usefulness, he didn't need the extra commitment of being an illegitimate child. So it was better to find someone else. A couple of days later, when the comments were published in an unknown magazine, Oral left for Gabron immediately. The next day, the newspaper headline said that the first prince had gone to see the Grenya princes to check on his wounds. When Duke Kaidel arrived at the imperial palace, the supply of military drugs had already left the tariffs, so the announcement was made by the emperor. And so 3 weeks passed so quickly. After that trip, Relicia visited the pharmacy a lot and helped the owner. The smell of bitter herbs on her clothes had a calming effect, probably because Relicia could smell it in the hut and from her mother's hair. While she was working with herbs, she thought that this might be the best path for her. And if she was asked to work here again, maybe she would stop resisting and agree. At least at the moment, she doesn't see how becoming a tutor or getting involved in the circle of things can help her. Another customer entered the pharmacy. He asked if there was Mandriosa and Felworth. He was immediately told that there was none, and he was about to leave. But Relicia heard these familiar names. These plants are very rarely used, and not even all pharmacies know about it. There's only one group of people who are interested in this: alchemists. So Relicia went to this guy and said that they can see if they can buy the plants used by alchemists. Then she kept the customer and even brought him tea, and then talked to the owner. He said that there was no point in buying these plants because they do not bring money. But Relicia was very persuasive because these plants will definitely bring money. After all, they are needed for alchemists, and alchemists are known for spending a lot of money, even if they are poor. Even considering the analogy, this is a great opportunity. The owner, although he doubted it, nevertheless agreed. He knew one person who could put such plants, but since he had never purchased such plants, he would have to wait at least 5 months. Of course, if they arrived earlier, they would be delivered immediately. The alchemist was fine with everything. He was ready to wait and even gave the address. He was even ready to pay in advance. Relicia looked at the address on the note and her expression changed dramatically. It said, "Deliver to Vined Royman, 3rd Imperial Palace Medical Lab." Relicia realized that she had started yelling at you again, "Get your grave." The main building of the Imperial Academy. Everyone is already getting used to life at the academy. Misa was very cheerful and approached almost everyone to chat, but some for some reason studiously ignored her. Although, for example, Milena really wanted to talk to her after the entrance ceremony. Misa, with her background as the daughter of the 3rd Lion and her dazzling beauty, attracted a lot of attention at the ceremony. But everything changed when the results of the first test were posted on the bulletin board and she found herself at the bottom of the list. Misa thought she had studied well at home, but the exam was brutal. She barely beat Lockhart, and only because he didn't take the test because of omission and got a 0. After that, the students lost interest in her and became obsessed with Colin, the girl who won first place. However, it wasn't disdain for Misa. The others simply didn't see the point in befriending someone who would soon leave the academy. That's the system here. Misa still thought that if she studied, she could fix the situation, because her father was the 3rd Lion of the Empire. Sooner or later, everyone would bow their heads before her. But despite the strength her mother had instilled in her, Misa had difficulty understanding the lectures, and when she was ready to stay, a ray of hope appeared. Lockhart Cadell approached her first to introduce himself, and even said that it was an honor for him to meet her. Relicia was immediately taken in by his good looks and beautiful words. Lockhart knows most of the students, but he still hasn't introduced himself to her, and now that moment has finally arrived. That's how he came up and wanted to ask a question, because he had been absent for some time and wanted to catch up on the material. Misa immediately agreed to help, completely forgetting about her academic performance. He asked her to tell him what they had learned in their classes on international trade routes, Smiowan or international waters, for example. Misa said she didn't know much about it and didn't remember it in class. Lockhart said he would then go to the academy management to sort it out, and in the end she felt guilty that she couldn't help properly. But he politely thanked her, even for that. After all, he took up her time. Trade routes are taught in the third year, and Lockhart was not really interested in the progress of the lectures, but in the level of her intelligence. If the Count's illegitimate child is so smart as to attract the attention of the second prince, then how much more of a natural daughter must she be? If she is as smart as Relisha, she would be an excellent candidate for the recruits Prince Grayan spoke of. But what a disappointment it was that Misa knew nothing about the question asked of her. Understands why she knows nothing about trade routes, but the problem of pirates in international waters is even mentioned in the entrance exam. Lockhart knew they were only half-sisters, but they were still sisters, so he didn't understand why there was such a big difference between them. Soon he came to the director and asked to look at the final exams. You can look at your work at any time for a year after passing. But actually he wanted to watch the exam of Robori C, that very best student who was never accepted into the academy. However, the director said that he couldn't look at the work of other students. Lockhart asked very hard, so he was able to persuade the director. The hall of the third palace. Relisha received the herbs and went straight there to deliver them to the lab. She had to say her first name during the interview, but she didn't want to say her last name because that could get her into trouble, and you can't use your real name. She said the name Relisha Roba, and then she was finally let in. She entered the laboratory and saw Director Royman there. This is the alchemist who came to the pharmacy. He did not expect the herbs to be delivered to the tap. But Relisha was used to surprising people. She put the package down and noticed that the man was making his own ingredients, which was bad for business. He was very impressed by the quality of the plants that had arrived. Relisha took the opportunity to advertise that she had brought the best plants that had arrived, and whether it was herbs or alchemical ingredients, the apothecary would do it all. Alchemists in this world are people who repeat mistakes over and over again to achieve what no one has achieved in 1,000 years. So if he continues to order plants and herbs from this pharmacy, it will all be great. He offered to write her a check, but Relisha asked for payment immediately. A check is good, but there is a sign that it is not the best first payment. In fact, it's a lie. Relisha just really wanted to hold real money in her hands from her labors. She said goodbye to him perfectly as an experienced pharmacist, in order to attract this client back. He asked her to wait in the lobby and said he would bring the money, and 30 minutes later she was still wandering around the street and couldn't figure out where she was supposed to go. She was walking in circles and there was no one to ask for directions. It was gone, someone's mocking media which radiate to the operational familiarity, and turning around she saw Lockhart. He asked what she was doing here. Was she pretending to be a peasant again? He was just saying that the noblewoman in Gibran looked more natural. It's kind of a compliment. But Relisha couldn't tell the difference between compliments and not. Next to that elbow, he was still a pervert in her eyes, despite the fact that he was catching a thief. He came closer, asked again why she was here, because she was not here today. He even thought that perhaps she came to him. Why on earth would Relisha come here for Lockhart? She admitted that she brought a delivery and works at the pharmacy. This is another side of the noblewoman he saw in Gibran. Lockhart even admired her. She really is a jack of all trades, because you need a lot of knowledge in medicine to work in a pharmacy. Relisha was delighted. She really was damn good when it came to medical rights. Lockhart laughed when she said that. His speech had become a little rough during the war, but he had never heard such speech from a heavy-born lady, and it left him rather astonished. Relisha cursed him and wanted to wring his dirty neck. Lockhart was very curious about who she really was, and thought that the Earl had opened the apothecary for her. But if it was her shop, she wouldn't be delivering the goods herself. The conversation reached a dead end, and Lockhart recalled their first meeting and asked, didn't she want to apologize for the time she perceived him as a pervert? He didn't have time to talk to her, but here they were again. So this is a sign from God. Relisha managed to justify herself. She had enough reasons to suspect him. Anyway, he forced her to apologize, so she even bowed, quickly rattled off that she had done wrong and treated him like a pervert, and then painfully ran away. It was not interesting she apologized too quickly, but he accepted this apology and asked where her pharmacy was. He could send people to find them, but that would only hurt business. Relisha asked him to keep it a secret and said she worked at Tolman's pharmacy at the end of Beloa Street. Although she looked so hot when she said it, in her mind she just hated Lockhart and hoped that their paths would never cross again. She was already leaving, but then she remembered that she didn't know where to go and asked to be taken to the reception room of the third palace.